Something easy I could say with this album. I could really easily say to you, oh, on this album, the Hunchback Project, Little B returns to what made his music great in the first place. But like, my idea of what made his music great is probably completely different from yours. He's really returning to that anguished, earnest tone that came through, not consistently, that came through from time to time in fits and starts, that came through on those earlier albums, including, the God's Father mixtape. And what am I hearing from Little B during that period of my life? A lot of songs where he's struggling to give voice to, disappointments in his own life. A lot of sorrow, a lot of agony. You have that sense of progression, of yearning, and then you have the recrimination, the look back on his own life. It's especially dark when he's reflecting on who his friends are, how he's been surrounded by people who aren't really his friends. It's almost made more effective and more evocative because Little B is not a natural poet. A lot of the time what you hear is his struggle to get that across in words and his struggle to get that across in music. It's not effortless. That sense of the struggle, that sense of the sorrow, it comes across in, like 100 songs on this guy's record. And I recognize, you listen to this video now, you may have never heard that side of Little B. You may have only heard this guy doing a novelty dance, the cooking dance, or making fun of Ellen DeGeneres, doing these really weird tracks. You may not realize that there really is something people connect to on an emotional level. That, Little B is a lot more meaningful to the lives of a lot of his fans than like the Beatles' White Album is to stereotypical people who grew up in the 1960s. This video is partly just a review of the new album that came out from Little B, September 2019, the Hunchback Project. It's partly also a set of reflections on how I became a fan of Little B, why I'm a fan of Little B, because I realize this video will partly be seen by people who are already fans of Little B and his music to some extent, people who are maybe wondering, is this new album worth downloading? Is it one of his best albums? Is it one of his worst? Just where does it stand on the spectrum? Like, people who are already fans who are interested in hearing a critical opinion of the album. But I know this video is also going to be seen by people who just have no idea why anyone would unironically be a fan of Little B and his music. And I am. I'm a fan of this guy's work with zero irony, And every so often I see questions on the internet, people just asking like, look, I understand there are kind of all these jokes surrounding this guy. Like, I understand, there are these kind of memes on the internet and people just kind of repeat these catchphrases. But is anybody out there like really a fan of Little B and his music? Does anyone like connect with this authentically? Or is it just one of these things on the internet where people keep repeating the joke again and again and it's not funny anymore? And if you also are like unironically a Little B fan, you must realize that the majority of people who have encountered his music did so by seeing like a viral video in which he's making fun of Ellen DeGeneres and just repeating the word swag again and again with like intentionally no rhythm. Like sort of some of the early work that was like a parody on celebrity culture and a kind of self-hating reaction to celebrity culture in Los Angeles and his own place and his own experience in Los Angeles. And it wasn't just Ellen DeGeneres. He made a whole series of songs like that. You realize, maybe even if you're a fan yourself, the first time you encounter Little B and this subculture of surrounding him on the internet, kind of raising one eyebrow, like, what? Then even a step beyond that, if you're someone who once gave this guy a chance and downloaded his albums, I remember myself, he put out a track that, the old heads could really appreciate. He put out a track called My Arms Are the Brooklyn Bridge.
People try to hate and second guess what I'm doing, man. The numbers don't lie unless you fake your whole movement.
And even the people who really kind of hated him on World Star Hip Hop at the time, this is years ago, a lot of people were like, okay, all right, we can recognize this. This is like conventional hip hop, whether old school or new school. We can recognize, the craft is here. There's a certain kind of sentiment and substance here, where people set up and said, okay, now we're willing to listen. But a lot of those same people would then get frustrated because he might put out like 50 tracks, like a whole pile of music, several projects or whatever, that then didn't have that quality or that direction, where he was taking things in a totally different artistic direction.
'Cause I'm young, you feel me? I'm way more young.
So another one of the problems, just for the fandom, for Little B, someone who jumped on at the God's Father mixtape and were expecting him to move consistently in that direction. Well, he didn't. He's a creative artist who really moves in a lot of different directions at the same time, and a lot of different directions over the same period of 5 years.
Most niggas funny, but peace ain't laughing. God looking down like children, what happened?
So like something easy I could say with this album. I could really easily say to you, on this album, the Hunchback Project, Little B returns to what made his music great in the first place. But like my idea of what made his music great is probably completely different from yours. The guy's body of work, there are so many tracks in the stack. Like, even within some of those albums, you and I may not be thinking of the same songs on the God's Father mixtape.
But money equals killing. If you think about it, everybody's willing to get $1 million. Motherfuckers pay the price over losing their children.
You and I may not be thinking of the same songs over a 10-year period, where intentionally or unintentionally we're picking and choosing our version of what it is we think Little B ought to be, what direction we think his music ought to go in future, and what made it great in the past. Obviously you could say that's true of a lot of mainstream artists. You could say that's true of the Beatles or of Bob Dylan. Like two different Bob Dylan fans have different periods they appreciate from Bob Dylan's music. It's way more extreme with Little B. The diversity that exists within his work, and just how many thousands of songs you're talking about. And then what I want to come back to here, even the question of, how did you as a fan, if you're unironically a fan of this guy's work, how did you first discover it and make some kind of emotional connection with it? Because I think it is really a question of whether or not you found something in that body of work that really means something to you, really moves you emotionally. So again, I'm saying this with zero irony. I was one of those guys who gave Little B a second chance back when My Arms Are the Brooklyn Bridge came out. So you put out this track, Brooklyn Bridge, and I was like, okay, so this is hip hop as I know it. This is rap music as I know it. I'm willing to listen.
Arms of the Brooklyn Bridge.
And I Googled around the internet. At that time, I found a bunch of blogs talking about Little B, but most of them were abandoned. Like they kind of already started up and shut down. And a lot of those blogs were saying, look, this is an artist who puts out hundreds of songs, and then for you as a listener, you've got to sift through them and find what it is you think is worth listening to. Like those are the rules this guy plays by. It's not like the old days of people paying $20 and getting 8 songs on a disc. Music is free, and there's a lot of it, and some of them are finished songs, and some of them are just like sketches, incomplete ideas set down on paper. And this new project, the Hunchback Project, it falls into 3 neat categories. There are 50 tracks on the album, 50, but you basically have a conventional album at the start with some concept tracks and lyrical tracks. Then there's a middle section of the disc, whatever you want to say. There's a middle section which is like a completely separate acoustic album. It's sort of a collection of tracks with no lyrics, instrumentals, you know. Some of those are very impressive and very interesting. Some of them, I wonder if Little B will in future add lyrics to them, or I wonder if he's putting them out there to invite other people, other aspiring rappers to rap over the tracks. Some of them stand up fine with no lyrics added to them, but that part may or may not interest you. And then there's a closing section of the album that are freestyles. And there's a big difference between the freestyles and the more composed first section of the album. So, you know, like, I don't think that's something to criticize. As I say, in an era when music is free, it's not even costing you 5 cents to download it. Take it or leave it. I think many people would prefer to have a short, tightly organized album where every track means something to them. But those are not the rules Little B plays by as a creative artist. So look, as I say, at that stage, way back when Arms of the Brooklyn Bridge came out and I Googled around a little bit, I already got the point that, you know, this was an artist who put out songs in bulk, and then you, as the listener, were going to edit that playlist. You were going to decide for yourself what stayed on your hard drive and what didn't. And again, I just point out, if this new album, the Hunchback Project, if it has 5 songs that mean something to you, that makes it a great album. You know, and if only 5 songs out of 50 stay in your hard drive, that's not a loss for Little B, and it's not a loss for you as a listener. That makes it a great album. That's really worth downloading. Anyway, the next big turning point for me was when my wife got pregnant. So my wife and I have now split up many, many years ago. So ex-wife now. I was together with my wife. She was pregnant. And during the pregnancy, I made the decision, okay, look, I'm going to delete all the rap music off my hard drive because, you know, I'm going to have a new baby crawling around. I don't want to be listening to music that consists of, you know, a lot of curse words and a lot of, you know, threats and boasting and stuff. It's like, okay, well, this can be a new period of my life. Whether it lasts 10 years or 15 years or whatever, I'm now going to have a period of my life where I'm not listening to rap music at all because I've got a new baby coming into this world. So my ex-wife and I ended up in the hospital. She gave birth to the kid. And when you go to the hospital, you don't know how long you're going to be there for, you know, the birth. You know, you could just be in and you're out overnight or in a few hours. And we were there for like a week or more. I forget. It felt like a long time, but I think we were there for like a week. And, you know, we're vegan. So I had to go out and buy food and bring in the food for her. It was this really tense situation because almost all of the doctors and nurses just hated us. There were 2 nurses who were really nice to us, I really remember. And one of them, she gave us like a card at the end, so we had her name. And we actually tried to send her a present in the mail, send her a gift, like a thank you gift, because we did have her name, so we looked up her name and got an address. I mean, I really appreciated the 2 people on staff who did not treat us like garbage. But man, the level of hatred and hostility we got from the doctors and nurses at that hospital was unbelievable. And a lot of that hostility, not all of it, but a lot of it was because from their perspective, at this hospital in the south of France, they regarded us as North African black. I know. In that cultural context in the south of France, where they do have a lot of black people from North Africa who, like in New York City, would be considered white, like they really don't have African features, the racism and the kind of colonial attitudes, they're really intense and really narrow. And some of the doctors and nurses who were the meanest to us, who were the cruelest to us, they were themselves of North African ancestry. Maybe not black, but they were like some kind of Arab from North Africa, some kind of Arabic person. And like, it goes a little bit deeper than just racism. Their feeling looking at us was that they, as this French medical doctor, they grew up connected to North Africa, connected to the Maghreb, but that they had fully assimilated. They had like adopted French civilization. They were now highly educated, elite members of French society. And like here, me and my ex-wife, they were looking down at us as like unassimilated new immigrants from North Africa. Dude, if you think this is my imagination, like on 2 different occasions, they literally directly said to us, they referred to us as African. In one of them, it was because they were insisting that we get a blood test done for the baby, a special blood test to check if she had genetic disorders that your people have in Africa. All right, so it's not my imagination. It's not the only reason they were so awful to us. But unbelievably, I was put in this situation where, you know, I know it sounds ridiculous. I was actually being despised for being a black African in the south of France, and a lot of the people despising me, they themselves were to some extent North African. You know, I bought a pair of speakers, and one of the reasons why at that time I downloaded a bunch of the albums from Little B was that I knew in the back of my mind, I was like, oh yeah, that was kind of always something I had in my mind of the things to do list. I knew I'd never been through this guy's back catalog of albums and sifted through, you know, the hundreds of tracks and decided which ones I liked or whatever. Like I knew that was something I could do, and I knew that the music was available for free. Like I wasn't going to, in that hospital, start downloading Wu-Tang or something. And like I say, my hard drive is empty. That was such a dark, such an emotionally exhausting period of my life. You know, having a new baby, it should be the happiest period of your life, happiest few days of your life. And instead, it was the most tragic. It was the most terrible. And the conflict at that hospital, it was real. I've mentioned this before on YouTube, but at one point, I literally had to stop a nurse from assaulting my wife, now my ex-wife. My ex-wife was lying on the bed. She was bedridden. It was just ridiculous. And, you know, when I physically, like, I just, like, went, but was like, you know, you really doing this? I remember she slammed that door on the way out afterwards, too. It was one of those, you know, one of those hospital safety doors. Anyway, man, I mean, it was so tense. It was so real. And I was listening to Little B. I was going through these tracks. And, you know, when I'd go into the city to pick up vegan food for my ex-wife, because we're vegan, and none of the food in the hospital is vegan. Man, walking down the street, whether or not I was listening to Little B at that minute, you know, I was listening through a lot of that stuff, you know, in and out of the hospital. Man, I had such a dark cloud over me. I had such a dark energy. This is a town in the south of France where they have those narrow streets, cobblestone streets. And there were pimps and drug dealers and prostitutes on those streets. Not a ton, not like an army, but, you know, there were homeless people and drug dealers and hustlers. I don't even think any of them were out to rob anybody, but there were people out doing stuff. And I was absolutely in that mode of like, you know, I wish you would. I wish you tried it. Even if I've got to spend the night in prison or something because somebody jumps me on the street. Man, I'd be so happy to spend a night in prison now instead of going back to that hospital, you know.
So what you scared for? You think about me? Pause, nigga. No reaction. You feel me? Niggas is classic. You're not hard. You're not hard. You feel me? I know that. Riding through with the motherfucking Mac.
And, you know, the other people on the street, you know, they picked up on it. I can remember there were, like, you know, drug dealers in the street who looked at me and they were like, you know, good.
You appreciate life? No, I don't fuck life. It ain't this shit for me, so fuck my beliefs.
It's not like a big road. It's not like a big street in Detroit or something. These are little narrow streets in an old city in the south of France. And you know, I didn't say a word to anybody. I didn't threaten anybody. But they were just picking up on that, you know. That rather be dead than alive, I wish you would vibe during a period of my life was unbelievably emotionally, you know, just heartrending.
Why you in my house? Man, I thought you was my friend. Why the fuck you in my house?
And what am I hearing from Little B during that period of my life? A lot of songs where he's struggling to give voice to, you know, disappointments in his own life. A lot of sorrow, a lot of agony, a lot of You know, I mean, a lot of his tracks, even musically, you have that sense of progression, of yearning, and then you have the recrimination, the look back on his own life. It's especially dark when he's reflecting on who his friends are, how he's been surrounded by people who aren't really his friends. You know, the people who act like they're his friends, they're really trying to hold him back, or they're ruining his life. People he thought were his friends, you know, aren't really that for him. He's got a lot of tracks talking about being bullied in high school. And by the way, I never was. So being bullied was not my problem. I was not one of the victims of bullying. But you get this, you know, this sorrow and this anguish coming across the track. And it's almost made more effective and more evocative because Little B is not a natural poet. A lot of the time what you hear is his struggle to get that across in words and his struggle to get that across in music. It's not effortless. That sense of the struggle, that sense of the sorrow, you know, it comes across in, you know, like 100 songs on this guy's record. And I recognize, you listen to this video now, you may have never heard that side of Little B. You may have only heard this guy doing a novelty dance, the cooking dance, or making fun of Ellen DeGeneres, or doing these really weird tracks. You may not realize that there really is something people connect to on an emotional level. That, you know, Little B is a lot more meaningful to the lives of a lot of his fans than like the Beatles' White Album is to stereotypical people who grew up in the 1960s. You know, there is something there that people care about. And, you know, I'd say it's just as much about the struggle of the messenger as it is about the message. And that's part of what makes this new album now, the Hunchback Project, an interesting turning point in Little B's own career. The same musical style that we saw in the Black Ken project in terms of his keyboarding, he's now really pressed further with that. That's really taken off. If anything, he's now demonstrating that what he was interested in musically in Rain in London, I think that album, like starting at the very earliest of those instrumental projects through to the Black Ken project, that he now has finally mastered that's become easy for him. Something he struggled to get to grips with on one album after another. And let's not forget, this is a guy who started off by rapping over beats other people send him on MySpace. And, you know, now he's really able to do with the keyboard everything he wanted to do. He's completely shed the gangster persona here. I don't think there's a single track on this album that's gangster, you know, which is a great thing. It's a beautiful thing. I think it's like he's reached a point in his career where there's enough substance for him to deal with emotionally that he doesn't need to put on the persona, put on the makeup, put on the wig of the street gangster anymore. Lyric after lyric in this album is him reflecting on now being 30 years old. The reason why it's called the Hunchback Project is that he's talking about being old, feeling the pain in his back, and, you know, having to take on a new perspective on life. Lyrically, the beauty of this is he's really returning to that anguished, earnest tone that came through, you know, not consistently, that came through from time to time in fits and starts, that came through on those earlier albums, you know, including, you know, the God's Father mixtape, a project that for many of us was when we first started taking Little B seriously and watching where he was going to go with this. The Hunchback Project, it is possibly the single greatest album, the single greatest project Little B has ever put out. Possibly. Now, he's got a huge catalog, he's got a lot of competition, but the fact that debate could happen, the fact that this could be, for you, subjectively, the best project he's ever put out, that really makes it worth downloading. That really makes it worth talking about.